Sedana. I'm one of the co-founders of e-GMAT, and I'm going to be your main host today. First things first, I want to just ask you, what challenges are you facing when it comes to critical reasoning? And so that we can kind of get a good list of things that we need to achieve during the webinar. Let's get those here. What challenges are you facing in the context of critical reasoning? Rethinking, okay, good. And if you can add some more detail to this to really say, when you say pre-thinking, what aspect of pre-thinking are you struggling with? Are you spending enough time? Are you able to do it in a few questions, but falter in others? Is your pre-thinking imprecise, or is it just when you start to do pre-thinking, your mind goes blank? How can we make the falsification and pre-thinking? Can eliminate two options, but getting wrong within the three options? But that's honestly not much of an achievement. Let me just start with saying that I have and I'll tell you using numbers why that's not much of an achievement. Time and reading between the lines, even if I get pre-thinking frame, I'm able to do that within the time. Okay. Contextualize this with regards to where you are in the overall learning process. Are you using stage 1, stage 2, or stage 3? That will help. But so far, I've gotten pre-thinking within 2 minutes during the exam. Heck, again, context with regards to where you are in the learning process. Figuring out the conclusion for tricky passages. Okay, Isha, that's very specific. That's really good. I really appreciate that level of specificity. Identifying the falsification question. You never identify the falsification question. You create the falsification question, and we'll definitely do that, Sanjana, in this webinar. So that's good. Okay. Mehak is at stage 2. That's good. That context helps. All right. Do have a few other folks. For those of you who've just joined, my question is, why are you here? What aspect of critical reasoning are you struggling with? What are you looking to achieve? If you can add that in the chat, that'd be really useful. Out of the 54 odd folks, I only have what 5 people who've responded, 5 to 6 so far. I'd appreciate a few more inputs there. Getting confused between two options. That's an observation. That's not the problem, not the cause of the problem, or not the core problem. That's just happenstance. And we're going to take multiple examples where you will still get confused, and you'll understand why you got confused. Because in the context of critical reasoning, or in fact any aspect of GMAT verbal, every option is either, you have one option that's absolutely correct, every other option is absolutely wrong. There's no close choice. It just so happens that many people get confused with the choice, and people call that a close choice. But in the context of the logic of the argument, it's not close at all. Answer choice analysis. Okay, we're going to definitely look at that. Most of my mistakes are out of scope answers. How to avoid that? Again, context would be useful, but out of scope answers means you don't understand the conclusion. And again, as we solve questions, we're going to delve this. So I think we have a really good list right now. So if there are, I think this is a really good set of goals that we have for this particular webinar. Let's try and achieve those. And towards the end, I'm going to ask you if I've been successful in doing the same. Okay. So for those of you who are paid students, you actually have pretty much everything that we offer. For those of you who are trying out e-GMAT, there are a bunch of exciting things in the free trial. We have our study planner, which I'm going to demonstrate. We actually have mocks. If you need to take a mock, we offer a free mock as well. And then we have some best practices with regards to how should you study, how should you not study. So again, Useful links here, I'm going to share them again in the webinar. We also have some upcoming webinars. We have a webinar on inequalities and absolute value. That's tomorrow. Very useful webinar. Again, we start from basic linear to quadratic equations and then build all the way up to inequalities and absolute value questions in this. So it covers the entire algebra, focuses on the process of approaching questions, and using that process, we answer some really challenging questions in the webinar itself. Then next week, we have a webinar that focuses on reading comprehension, multi-source reasoning. Again, very similar to this webinar, the goal is to really tell you how to approach these questions the right way, and then to demonstrate how to approach these questions and solve some of the most challenging questions that the test can throw at you, whether you're looking at humanities passages, whether you're looking at econ or earth sciences kind of passages. The approach here will help you dissect the passage, get the core of it, and then answer questions correctly. So that's exactly a week from now. With that, I have a poll question here, which is, when do you guys plan to take the test? And based on what I see over here, I have three more or less equally sized groups, about 30% each, where people have the test in just either 31 to 45, 46 to 75, or those who haven't taken a date yet, presumably are have more than 75 days before the test. Okay, with that, I'm going to go in the sharing pane. I'm going to first talk about your overall study plan, and then we are going to essentially look at how to do pre-thinking here. Just give me 1 second. All right. So I'm going to share my screen. You should be able to see my screen fairly soon. Perfect. All right. So I'm going to spend about 10 minutes helping you understand how to go about building your study plan. I'm going to create a new plan from scratch. Over here, let's go and create a new plan here. So we have this tool called Personalized Study Planner, and each one of you should, when you're starting a GMAT preparation, and even if you're in the middle of your preparation, you should really have a clear idea of what should you study, the sequence in which you should study things, as well as how long should you spend on every subsection of the GMAT. Let's say subsection: critical reasoning, reading comprehension, multi-source reasoning, number properties, word problems, etc., etc. So I'm going to demonstrate that. So let's say we're going to look at someone who's aiming for a 685 here, and which is essentially a 97 percentile, 740 equivalent on the classical GMAT, and the current score is 575. So they're looking for a pretty, a good improvement. They could have either taken the actual GMAT or an MBA.com test or a Sigma X mock, which is an e-GMAT mock test. Each one of those mocks provides all the data points that you need. So again, you're aiming for 110 point improvement, or going from a 62nd percentile to a 97 percentile here. You can really see that. Let's load your current sectional scores. Let's assume you're someone who's at a 79 in verbal, and 84 in quant, and accordingly you kind of put that quant score to be 83, but we get the DI score to be a 74. So again, the tool's smart enough to really say, hey, your DI score has to be within these limits given what your overall score is, as well as given your quant and verbal scores. So you can really see the percentiles here. Clear strength in quant, clear weakness in both verbal and DI. And the tool understands these percentiles, understands these ability levels. And based on this, it navigates through a bunch of possibilities to get to that score of 685, and gives you a possibility that's optimum given your strengths. And you can see some of this over here. First of all, you can see there are about 93 probable paths to go from a 575 to a 685. Then the second thing that you can really see is that it leverages your quant strength. It really says, hey, you should aim for that 88 in quant, and accordingly, you need to get to an 83 and 81 in verbal. Now, there are multiple paths that can lead to the score, but this is something which it believes is optimal, and it's a really good recommendation. But if you really wanted to do something which says, hey, I don't like DI at all, I'm going to aim for a higher verbal or a higher quant score, you could do that as well. I wouldn't recommend doing that just because that 89 in quant becomes really risky. I'd recommend just going with this, or you can build your own combination. It'll ensure that you always get to that 685 scores. I'm going to start with this, and with that, you get an initial estimate. You'll see that appear on your screen very soon of how long you'd need. So this is your improvement path: 4-point improvement in verbal, but about a 35 percentile point improvement in verbal, a 5-point improvement in quant, and about a 7-point improvement in DI. You can see the initial time estimates there. Again, these are initial estimates. These estimates will be refined as we add more data to them. And then this is a chart that's created for you. And this is something that is very interesting. This is where you can really see, hey, your quant ability is higher. So you're going to start with stage 2. Your first job's going to be to figure out all the areas of weakness, and then move to stage 1 and do only the relevant piece and then move forward. But in verbal and in DI, you are going to start with stage 1 first, and then you're going to move to stage 2. You can see the legend over here, and then stage 3. So really important to understand how you go about learning in each section, and you're going to see that at a subsection level as well. So let's say you're someone who's at a 50th percentile in CR, your overall verbal percentile is 51, and about a 46 percentile in RC. As you provide more data, it refines those time estimates. Again, it assumes you're going to put in about 20 hours a week. We'll change and put in actual data later on, but this is a good assumption to start with. And then we're going to move forward. Let's go over here. We're going to do the same thing in quant. That's assuming slightly stronger in quant here, in arithmetic, and slightly weaker in algebra. Let's put that, and that would lead to more refined estimates. It's about 2 weeks here. So that number did go down about 40 hours in this case. I'm going to accept this. And then the same thing with DI. Now, you're someone who's stronger in quant here. So I'm going to try and push that DS2 to a higher score. GI and TA also to a higher. TPA and MSR are probably here. So with that, we're going to look at DI milestones here. And again, you can see about 5 weeks or about 100 hours. So the initial estimate is fairly accurate, but then you now have granular estimates for DS, for GI and TA, for TPA and MSR. And the nice thing about this is that because it understands that you're going to first do verbal and then do DI. So it assumes that you have built that verbal ability. So that's why the TP and MSR estimates are not 3 weeks or 2 weeks, but they're about 1 to 1.5 weeks, because the system understands how much incremental learning you need to do. So here again, we have more refined times. You can see slight changes on the verbal and DI side, but significant reduction on the quant side of things here. Then you can really put in the sequence of learning. You can do quant verbal DI or verbal quant DI. I'm going to keep this over here. And then you can really say, adjust this on a per day basis. You can say, hey, I'm going to study a lot more on Tuesday, maybe study slightly more on Thursday. Friday, I'm going to not study as much. Saturdays, I can do 2 sessions of 3 hours each. So 6 hours over here. So about 23 hours a week. I'm going to set this over here. I'm going to pick a start date here, and then I'm going to run with this. Okay, so based on this, it tells you, hey, maybe around the 9th to 16th October is when you can really take the test. And again, it tells you how you'd be spending, how much time in which section. And then in each section over here, you can now see what your journey is going to be. So in verbal, for example, you're going to start with master comprehension, then you're going to go towards critical reasoning, do cementing there, reading comprehension, do cementing there, test readiness, and then you're going to move forward. Same thing in quant. You're going to do cementing first, and then just do the bare minimum NP course. Do word problems. Remember, you're at a very high starting ability in quant. If you were at a lower starting ability in quant, let's say if your starting ability were around 30 or 35th percentile, these numbers would be significantly higher. And that's because our courses are adaptive, especially in quant. And so they make sure that you learn only the stuff that you need to learn here. Same thing over here. And then on DI side of things, Again, you can see how long you take to finish the course, and then cementing, and do the same thing here. And then you can map this, finalize this, and you can execute this plan here. And when you do that, what you really see is that you have this calendar view where you can keep your entire preparation updated. You can see it starts on the 15th, not on the 13th of July, and you can move forward. And here, if it so happens that that you can't study on a particular day, or you can study more, then you can always update this. You can mark this as a no study day, or if you check this off, and if you put in 4 hours here, you can save and close this, and you can really see that this is going to go from 3 to 4 hours in this case. So if you choose not to study here, you can mark this as a no study day, and as you do that, you can see this turns to 0 hours. All right, so hopefully that helps you understand how to go about building that study plan. With that, hopefully you guys found this useful. We're going to go right into the core of our planning here. So let me turn my video on once again. All right. I'm going to keep the video sweet and short, that we focus most of our time and energy on the presentation. But hopefully that planner was useful for you. I know a couple of you raised hands. If you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A pod, which is right here. This is your Q&A pod here. This is the Q&A pod. And then I have this generic short answer pod where you'll have questions to my answers. Answers to my questions. Sorry about that. I'm going to just move forward here. For those of you who are not connected with me on LinkedIn, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I have, I think, right now upwards of 23,000 students who are connected with me on LinkedIn here in this case. So what are we going to do in pre-thinking? We're going to start with understanding how you currently approach CR questions. Then we're going to build a foundation of what an assumption is, and then what pre-thinking is. And then from that point on, we're going to apply pre-thinking to a bunch of arguments. We actually have created a few more questions in this webinar. So depending on the pace that we're going at, I'm going to use those questions, or we'll really have those as exercise problems for you guys. Okay, so let's talk about how you currently approach critical reasoning here. So I'm going to put in a poll question. The question says, which methodology do you use? But before that, I want to make sure I clarify what pre-thinking is. Pre-thinking is a method to ensure that that you understand the logic that the author uses to arrive at the conclusion. So in technical terms, pre-thinking in the context of assumption questions is thinking of one potential assumption in your mind. And when you become a skilled pre-thinker, you'd be able to do this in about 15 seconds after you've read the argument and before you look at answer choices. We were the first company to actually create a clear framework for pre-thinking. It's an e-GMAT term, pre-thinking, and so I want to make sure that you understand this is what pre-thinking is. If you go out, a lot of people will tell you pre-thinking is predicting the answer. The goal of pre-thinking is not to predict the answer. The goal of pre-thinking is to ensure that you understand the logic that the author uses. And the benefit of that is that if you pre-think properly, you understand exactly what you're aiming for in terms of the conclusion. And when out of scope answer choices are there, or when close answer choices are there, it helps you eliminate those answer choices. This is not a means to again predict what the answer is going to be, because any argument can have multiple assumptions, definitely have multiple strengtheners, multiple weakeners. Our goal is not to figure out what's there in the answer choices. Our goal is to really say that we understand this could be one correct answer, so that when you see another correct answer, your brains actually automatically selects it, because you already have a framework to evaluate what's correct versus what's not. Okay. So that's something which is there. Now, I want to figure out what questions, which methodologies do you use? There are two methodologies here. One is read the argument, look at the answer choices, and then come back to the argument. So do that back and forth till you reach the final candidate. The second is the pre-thinking approach, and you can read that. So I'm going to put in the poll question here. It's going to cover your screen. I want you to tell me which methodology do you use. Remember, methodology 1 is where you read the argument, then go to the answer choices, do not do pre-thinking and do the back and forth. Methodology 2 is where you spend time doing pre-thinking and then go to the answer choices, and hopefully you do way less back and forth. So I have about 67 people in the webinar. I only have 42 responses so far. Let's get to about 45. 3, 2, and 1. I have 47 responses. I'm going to broadcast results. More or less 50-50 breakdown here in this case. So folks who do pre-thinking, through this webinar, I want to make sure you become better pre-thinkers. For those of you who don't do pre-thinking, I want to just provide you justification and demonstrate why you need to do pre-thinking and how it can help you become a better test taker, and in general, be better at putting your point across in arguments or discussions that you have with your peers. Okay. I have a couple of questions that I'd like to address as a little segue, and then I'm going to come back to the argument. So Sanjit's saying it's been a couple of months before that when I had a couple of months of break from the GMAT. Prior to that, I was at a 655 level. What do you recommend I do to take a free mock test? So Sanjit, great question. I'm sure many of you, there are a few other folks who have same question. First of all, 655 is a really good starting score. What I recommend doing is, to get back, solve 10 to 15 questions of each section, so quant, verbal, and DI. Honestly, if you prepared for the webinar, prepared for the GMAT before, you should have solved some questions. Maybe just solve, if you have an error log, go through your error log, solve the question where you made mistakes, and then take a mock. You should be back at that 655 level. I've seen people who get to that 655 level, once they do the revision, get back to it very, very easily over here. Krishnan is saying, e-GMAT website's not opening on my laptop. I'm not able to understand why that is the case, because it used to work. So Krishnan, in your case, most likely, because e-GMAT's running hale and hearty, so we have right now about 400 people on the website logged in, attempting content right at this moment. So most likely, it's the connection between your internet service provider and Amazon Web Services. What I'd recommend is just disconnect your Wi-Fi connection, and use your laptops, your cell phones, cell phone provider, and tether. This usually happens once in 2 months with one ISP for a couple of hours, and that usually is the case. There's nothing that we can do. It happens with every website in the world. So that usually is the case. If somewhere on the internet that route's broken, then that happens overall. So that's all I would say. In fact, if you try accessing e-GMAT through your cell phone, it'll work without turning off your Wi-Fi. So most likely it's your ISP. So that way. So hopefully that helps, Krishnan. Okay. So with that, I want to make sure that I explained to you that pre-thinking is not a end-all piece over here. Pre-thinking, if you want to be successful in pre-thinking, you need to have certain skills. And the most important skill in the context of GMAT verbal is the ability to visualize information. So that's really, really important here. So when you talk about visualizing information, you're talking about visualizing two things in your own word. One is the conclusion. The second is the answer choices. And visualizing something means that imagining something's happening in front of you. If you really just say, hey, the seawall is going to sustain the hurricane, then you can imagine the strongest hurricane that's there, or the hurricane that's been talked about in context, and the seawall being strong enough to actually be taller than the highest waves that are going to come in that case. So that's kind of visualizing and imagining things happen in front of you. 9 out of 10 times, if you're unable to arrive at an answer or make a mistake, you've either done the wrong visualization, or you've not done visualization at all, or you're unable to visualize. It's one of those three things, and I'm going to demonstrate that. If you've done the wrong visualization, then you've got to really figure out which words did you read incorrectly, so that the translation of those words was incorrect. If you did not do visualization, then you've got to build the habit over there. Okay. The second thing is connecting things, which is what we call as building the logical structure. So conclusion is usually just one statement or fragment in a statement. There are about 2 to 3 other statements in an argument which either support or go against the conclusion, which you call as premises or anti-premises. And building that logical structure, connecting them to the conclusion, the role that they play is really, really critical. In other words, if you're really good in boldface, you should be really good in every other aspect of critical reasoning, just because in boldface you're forced to do this explicitly. Okay. Once you are able to do this in 1 and 2, then doing pre-thinking is simply a process. So the falsification question has a standard structure. I'm going to demonstrate that, and we're going to be able to come up and create precise falsification questions with that structure every time, regardless of the argument, whether it's a predictive or a causal argument. You'd be able, and regardless of the context of the predictive or causal argument, be able to come up with the falsification structure here. With that, one thing that I want to tell you is we as humans, if we visualize things properly, are extremely skilled pre-thinkers. Our brains are wired that way. And to prove my point, I'm going to give you a very, very simple argument, an argument that you visualize day in and day out, or parallel to that argument that you visualize day in and day out. And most of you'd be able to come up with what the correct assumption is. So here's the argument. Take a stab at it. Tell me, what does the author assume here? You have about 60 seconds. Type your answers, press enter in the short answer part. And one response. Let's get a few other ones. Juven, you can put the response on the right-hand side. Short answer pod, not in the Q&A pod. All right, so some really good answers. Ivy schools need more than a score higher than 500. Minimum requirement to get into an Ivy is 500. Is more than 500. Cutoff for Ivy is higher than 500. So those are all good answers. And so you can really see really simple argument, context that you understand this, and you're able to come up with this fairly quickly over here. And again, if you were to read the argument, the author presents a data point, which is that Joe scored a certain data point here, and based on this, the author makes a prediction that Joe will not get admission. Remember, Joe hasn't gotten admission. We don't even know if Joe has applied to an Ivy League school, but he's making a prediction. So he's talking about something in the future, which is what we call as a predictive argument or making a claim here. And so the claim is that he will not get admission in an Ivy League college. So the assumption here is that a score of 500 for someone like Joe, and this is something which is extremely important to understand in the context of CR, that if the conclusion is about a particular entity, the assumptions are going to be about that entity or about that group of or that segment of entities. Why? Because the author is not saying that the Prince of Saudi Arabia will not get into an Ivy League school. The author is saying Joe. And again, you've got to understand, if Joe truly were the Prince of Saudi Arabia, the author would have specified that. Yeah. Okay. So with that, I want you to tell me, what's the definition of an assumption? Again, tell me, how do you define an assumption? And in this entire webinar, I'm going to ask you to write down 2 things. One of them is the definition of an assumption. Why? Because the definition of an assumption is so precise that if you understand this and if you apply this to any CR question, when you're confused between 2 answer choices, if you apply that as a framework, you'd be able to reject the correct one and reject the incorrect one and select the correct one always. So you've got to know what an assumption is. What's the definition of an assumption? Okay, I have 4 answers, or 3 answers rather in this context. Bridges the gap between premise and conclusion. It's an unstated premise. Every assumption definitely is that. One thing that I'll tell you is every unstated premise is not an assumption. In other words, a statement can be an unstated premise, but will not satisfy the requirements of an assumption. Something unstated that must be true for the conclusion to hold true. That's a really good definition. Um, if if an assumption fails, the argument will shatter. That definitely happens. So good. A number of you have a reasonably good understanding of what an assumption is. Assumption, as one of you said, it's an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to hold true. It's something that I want you to write down, and I want you to remember this. As I said, I'm going to ask you to remember two things in this entire webinar. This is one of those two, because both of those things essentially are things that will help you answer every assumption question. Now, one other thing that I'll tell you is pre-thinking is something that you use not only for assumption, but you also use that for evaluate, for strengthen, weaken, logically complete, and in fact for boldface as well. The core process of pre-thinking remains the same. The pre-thinking question, or in this case, would the equivalent of falsification question, that varies slightly, but the overall process, the overall skills required to successfully do pre-thinking, they remain the same. Okay. Again, an assumption is an unstated idea that satisfies this one very interesting condition that we call as must be true condition for the conclusion to be valid. And I want to explain what that must be true is, and I want to just not just explain, we want to apply that as well. So every correct assumption will satisfy two characteristics. One is it will provide information that you cannot infer from the argument. So it will provide new information. New information means non-inferable information, or information that you can't infer from the factual aspect of the argument. And the second is it will provide that extremely strong linkage, which is what we call as must be true. Now, 99% of the questions on the GMAT will test this must be true. In fact, many challenging questions will just test the must be true aspect. So we're going to focus a lot of our time on this, but I also want to make sure that you understand there are a couple of questions that test whether an answer choice is providing new information or not. So in other words, the content of the answer choice will satisfy the must be true condition, but will not provide new information. That's something that's also tested. We're going to see one such question in this webinar as well. Okay, now how do you visualize what an assumption does? So the best way to look at this is to really visualize the entire argument as a roof, as a house, and this roof as a conclusion. And you have these three supporting pillars that are supporting your conclusion, the three premises over here. Okay, so we've got to figure out which one of these is an essential pillar. So we're going to name them as 1, 2, and 3. And let's kind of see what happens when we remove one of these pillars. We remove one, and 2 and 3 are still there, which means that the conclusion can stay upright without pillar 1 being there. It's weakened, but it does stay upright over here. Okay, so which means 1 is not an assumption. You remove 3 as well. Conclusion still upright. It's weakened, significantly weakened, but it's still there. It's not broken. So 3 is not an assumption either. So we bring back 1, 2, and 3. And at this time, we remove just 2. And as we remove just 2, the roof caves in, which means 2 is definitely an assumption. Now, each one of these, 1, 2, and 3, supported the conclusion. They were premises, but only 2, pillar number 2 was the assumption. So that's kind of the visual aspect of what an assumption is. Okay, and so in other words, that's why we also call an assumption as an essential pillar of the argument. Okay. Now I have this question here. A person's thinking based on limited set of knowledge, and I think the person also questions. The statement that the person is making is that your awareness of context has an ability on your impacts your ability to answer questions. And yes, there is some of that over there. If you are aware of certain context that the argument talks about, then it becomes easier for you to answer questions. But let me just say this, that's only because you're able to visualize that argument properly. If, on the other hand, you see a context that you're completely unaware of, GMAT CR arguments are created so beautifully that you would still be able to visualize it. It'll take you longer to do that, and that's absolutely okay. But you'd still be able to visualize it. They're very, very self-contained. And in fact, in my conversations with the folks at the GMAC, they spend a ton of time ensuring that contextual awareness is not a limiting factor when it comes to answering either critical reasoning or reading comprehension or MSR or TPA. That's a lot. They spend a ton of time with regards to contextual awareness, and the same thing is about geographic localization as well. So don't worry that, hey, if you're not such a well-read person, then you're not going to be able to answer a lot of questions. No, that's not the case. Now, you might be slower initially, but eventually, if you truly are focusing on building your visualization ability, you'd get there. And when I say eventually, we're talking about a good 70, 75 hours of effort. You're not talking about 400 hours of effort just on critical reasoning, but 60, 70, very, very manageable amount of effort over there. But again, that has to be diligent effort, not effort where you're just skimming through arguments. Okay, does that help? Let's clear all answers. So what does must be true mean? Must be true means is, and the must be true aspect of the assumption is that if the information provided by the argument is not true, then the conclusion, there's a way to break the conclusion. Okay, there's a possibility to break the conclusion. Why? Because the core definition of an assumption is that the assumption is required for the conclusion to hold true. Or in other words, if you don't have that essential pillar, the roof can't stay upright. Okay, so let's kind of apply this over here. So we said uh, uh, we're going to look at the same argument, and let's kind of understand the scenario in which my conclusion can break down. My conclusion breaks down if Joe gets admission in an Ivy League school with that score of 500. So when that happens, my conclusion breaks down. So let's see how we use that knowledge to evaluate whether a hypothetical answer choice is correct or not. So this is the answer choice that we're going to evaluate here. This one is the answer choice that we're going to evaluate here. And we're going to really say, hey, if this answer choice is not must be true, will my conclusion break down? If it's not the essential assumption, what happens to my conclusion? And the answer choice is score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe is unacceptable to Ivy League colleges. Now, when you really say, and this is about any statement, not just a critical reasoning answer choice, but when you say a statement is not necessarily true, by default, what you're saying is that you believe its negated instance is true, which means a score of 500 for someone like Joe on the GMAT is acceptable to Ivy League schools. And if that statement is true, then what happens to my conclusion? Does it break down? Absolutely. Why? Because if a score of 500 becomes acceptable, then I, as an author, cannot say with 100% certainty that Joe will not get admission in an Ivy League school. So, which means that in the presence of the negated instance or absence of that pillar, if my conclusion breaks down, then that pillar was something which I needed to hold my conclusion true. Okay. So some of you may be wondering, Rajat, how can you say that if a statement is not true, then I believe its negated instance is true? Let's look at this. Someone tells you Harvard has the best MBA program. If you really tell him that, hey, this is not necessarily true, then what you're really saying is that an MBA program that is just as good or better than Harvard exists, in your opinion. Isn't that true? If you say, hey, this is not necessarily true, you would only say this if you believe that there's something which is just as good or even better than Harvard exists. Short answer part, guys. Isn't that true? You say that's not true, you're by default saying that. Can you hear me, guys? Hello? I'd like to see some typing in the short answer part there. Okay. Let's take another statement here. John runs faster than David. If you say that's not true, in other words, what you're really saying is that David is just as fast, or David could even be faster than John. Because if you're saying this is not true over here, by default, you're also saying this over here. Okay. So when you say a statement is not true, by default, what you're saying is its negated version is definitely true. In other words, when you say an answer choice is not the correct assumption, what you're really saying is I don't need the information in that answer choice for that conclusion to hold true. And you're going to really see multiple instances of it, but I want to make sure that that's it. And this comes truly from the definition of an assumption, which says it's an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. Because it's an unstated idea, you've got to provide it to the argument. Okay. It cuts the other way as well. If the answer choice is the incorrect answer choice, then the conclusion will not break down in the presence of negated instance. Okay. So which means that you negate that answer choice, nothing's going to happen to my conclusion. Kind of take the same argument, another example. And the example that we're going to take is a score of 500 on the GMAT is not a good score. Let's see, if that must be true, do we require that the score of 500 not be called a good score? So we say, hey, what happens if I negate this? If I say this is, um, um, if I negate this, then a score of 500 on the GMAT becomes a good score. Now, does my conclusion break down if the negated instance becomes true? The answer is no. Why? Because Joe won't get admission even if score of 500 is called a good score. Why? Because if you look at the initial argument is not predicated on what you call the score of 500, what you classify the score of 500. In fact, the logic of the argument will still remain the same if you swap 500 with 700, or in fact 705 or 655 or 645 or so. Okay. Let's take another argument. The quality of an applicant's essays does not play a significant role in deciding whether he gets into an Ivy League school. So we're going to evaluate that and say, is that must be true? Which means, will Joe get admission if the statement to the left is no longer true? So if we say this, if this statement is no longer true, then what becomes true? The quality of your essay starts to play a significant role over there. Then will Joe get admission? Absolutely not. Why? Because if Joe doesn't reach the minimum threshold of the GMAT, then those essays don't even start to play a role over here. Yes, the essays would be significant, but only once he has that minimum threshold on the GMAT over here. Okay. So that's kind of that you have a certain understanding of what an assumption is. Now we're going to really move towards what pre-thinking is. We've still not tackled pre-thinking, and to do that, we're going to you guys are going to have baptism with fire. So I'm going to give you an answer choice, an argument which is a relatively sophisticated argument. I want you to attempt to pre-think over there, find out what does the author assume, and then I'm going to go about my way of doing pre-thinking. You're going to really see how I break down the argument, how I visualize information in the argument. And then, we're going to solve a bunch of questions with that understanding of the argument and that pre-thinking framework. But just to be very clear, for the correct answer choice, the conclusion will break down in the presence of the negated version of that answer choice. For the incorrect one, the conclusion will continue to hold true. Okay. So with that, let's now do a pre-thinking exercise. By the way, if you want to get an article on how to assume things, let me just see. So here's how to negate things, not how to assume. Here's an article on negation that we wrote some time back. So you can download this article as well. Okay. Now, here is the process that we're going to go through. I'm going to give you an argument, as I said, fairly sophisticated argument. So it's not going to be a small 2-line argument, but about a 3 to 4 line argument. Slightly more sophisticated logic because we want to up the ante right now. I'm going to give you the argument, no answer choices, just a blank short answer part. I want to put in your pre-thinking. You'll have about 2.5 minutes to do this, so you'll have ample time. So go really slow, visualize information as you read, and then I'm going to go about doing pre-thinking my way. Okay. Does that make sense? Is that fair? And then we're going to solve a bunch of questions post this. Perfect. Okay, with that, get your pen and paper ready. Here is the argument that's coming. I'm going to remove broadcast results. So when you put in your pre-thinking, type it out, press enter. You won't see anything on the screen, but the system will record it. So don't worry about that if you don't see anything on the screen after you've typed it out. Okay. But press enter, put the answer in the short answer part. I'm looking at it. I'm expecting at least 15 to 20 answers. I have about 75 students here in the webinar, so that's not a big ask. And you guys seem to be a reasonably enthusiastic group. So let's see that. Here is the argument. Good luck, guys. Okay, another 15 seconds. Get those answers in. Alex, please put those answers on the right-hand side. Perfect. Thank you, Alex. 3, 2, and 1. Let me actually resume my webcam as well, so you guys should be able to see that. Okay. So I'm going to broadcast results. I have back with 11, 12 responses. That's good. I'd expect more people to do this, to participate, because the more you participate, the more feedback you get, the faster you learn. The other thing, Nidhi and everyone else, no one calls me sir, everyone calls me Rajat. So, so that way, we have a more open exchange of ideas. All right. So let's kind of see the approach that we're going to really take. We're going to first understand what the conclusion is. We're going to visualize the conclusion. And then usually the way I go about visualizing conclusion is by assigning numbers. It helps me. I've found a lot of people like this approach, and a lot of people improve with this approach. Why? Because when you assign numbers to this, when you translate words to numbers, you are you're aspiring to achieve a level of precision that in the process by itself has a self-correcting nature to it. So try and assign numbers here, and in most contexts it works. In a few contexts it doesn't, but most of the contexts it works, and it leads to faster improvement here. So we're going to understand, visualize the conclusion. We're going to really look at how does the author justify that conclusion, the logic that he uses, and then we're going to ask this pre-thinking questions. I'm going to just tell you what that pre-thinking question is. Now, if we formulate the pre-thinking question properly, the assumptions should jump right at us. Let me just say this. So the mistake that people make, the reason why some people struggle with pre-thinking is because they either don't do steps 1 or 2 correctly, or their formulation of the pre-thinking question is incorrect. Okay, let's talk about the general structure of that pre-thinking question. So it stems from the very definition of an assumption. What's an assumption? It's an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. So which means that without the assumption, the conclusion will break down. Okay. In other words, if you were to build that house, if you were to go back to this, that house would be built around scenarios, or if you were to build a house with that roof upright, and if you were to figure out where to put those essential pillars, you will first ask yourself, where is it that my conclusion breaks down? And if you figure out those areas where your conclusion breaks down, then you're going to put essential pillars over there. Okay, so to figure out where the assumptions are, or what those essential pillars are, we have to figure out the scenarios in which my conclusion breaks down. The falsification process was just as simple as that. So we're going to ask the question after reading the argument: under what circumstances, given the facts and the argument, will my conclusion break down? So we only have to enter 2 pieces of information in this argument. This question will remain the same. You will only get circumstances from the argument. You'll only get the conclusion breakdown criteria from the argument and fill it over here. But this sentence, this falsification question, is going to remain the same regardless of the argument. You're going to see me demonstrate this again and again in this session here. Okay, so here's the argument. The first thing that I want you to tell me is which statement is the main conclusion. Okay, I'm going to reopen this poll. Which of these 3 statements is the main conclusion? Right, I only have 18 responses, 26 responses, 31, 3, 2, and 1. About 35 responses. Let me end the poll. 45 responses so far. Okay, you can really see half the people got this right. Statement 2 is indeed the main conclusion, but then you can see a significant number of you think statement 1 is the main conclusion, and a significant number of you also think statement 3 is the main conclusion. So when it comes to the main conclusion, a main conclusion is always what the author wants to achieve from this argument. What idea does the author want to promote? using this argument. And when you look at this over here, statement two is what is the idea that the author wants to promote. Now, people who chose statement one, more often than not, they look at this word concludes and they really say, hey, because the word concludes here, statement one could be the main conclusion. Now, remember this, the main conclusion in an argument is always by the author of the argument. So please make sure you understand that. And so that's something that's absolutely critical. Statement one is not by the author. Statement one is just a fact that is used to justify the argument. It's in fact is a premise. The conclusion, statement two, is built on it. Now, a lot of people are also confused between statement two and statement three. When you are there, if there are two statements, and especially if the main conclusion is in the center of the argument and not towards the end, which usually is easier to decipher, then you have to really say, is statement three written to justify statement two, which means does statement 3 support statement 2, or does statement 2 support statement 3? When you ask this question, what you're going to find is that this part, that this one is correct. Statement 3 supports statement 2. This one is wrong. Because statement 3 supports statement 2, statement 2 is your main conclusion, because statement 3 is used to justify statement 2. Is that clear for people who chose either statement 1 or statement 3? Perfect. Okay. So always ask what's the main idea that the author wants to promote? What's the main claim that the author wants to promote from this particular argument here? Okay. So that's where statement two is the main conclusion. Now, this is something that is really critical, because if you didn't know what the main conclusion was, you wouldn't even be able to focus on arriving at the correct assumption here. Okay. Now let's kind of visualize this main conclusion. The main conclusion is the difference between professors in the tenure system and other full-time lecturers has to do with the reward system for the former. Who is the former here? Who does this former refer to? The tenured faculty. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we're comparing two entities here. The basis of comparison is the reward system. Another thing that's really important to recognize here is that the author is not disputing the report's findings. In fact, he's building up on it. He's actually justifying or really saying why did the reports find that tenured faculty did not do as good a job as full-time lecturers did. Okay, so essentially, if you were to visualize this, what you have to really just say is, hey, tenured faculty had only 40% of the students improve significantly. Full-time lecturers did, but 70% of the students improve significantly. And the reason for that is the reward system for the former. Okay. Now, I just want to ask another question over here, another poll question. Where is my, whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? This is just about statement 3. Whose reward system, in your opinion, does statement 3 talk about? And you have 4 options here: just tenured faculty, just lecturers, both, or neither. Whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? I have 23, 25, 26, 38, 42, 43. Let's get a couple of more responses. 3, 2, and 1. But the percentage is stabilized. So you can see about 50 responses here. 74% of you are correct. Absolutely. It's just tenured faculty broadcast results. But the other ones, you can really see there are a significant number of you who've chosen both as well. As you read this, you've got to read and translate over here. The criterion for rewarding tenured faculty typically places a greater emphasis. This greater is comparing the emphasis on research and the emphasis on teaching. A way to translate this is to really say, hey, maybe there is 70% 30% on teaching. That's kind of a way to translate. Could be 70-30, 60-40, 80-20, doesn't matter, as long as there's a more than 50% emphasis on research and less than 50% emphasis on teaching. And that's kind of where translating words to numbers becomes absolutely critical. And you can really see, just identifying the conclusion, reading and visualizing an answer choice, you've had a significant number of people who made mistakes there. If you made mistakes there, of course, you'd struggle to pre-think, or your pre-thinking would be wrong, which will lead you to making mistakes in the answer choices. So fix that. As you fix that, the faster you fix that, and these are not super challenging things to fix, the faster you would improve. Okay. So again, the structure of the argument: statement 2 is the main conclusion, statement 3 is a supporting statement, and statement 1 also supports the main statement. It also provides the context that we're talking about here. So again, now let's do the pre-thinking question. We've done a hard part here. Now we're going to really just do the easy part. So what's the easy part? We're going to translate this. We have two parts that we need to translate. This is the general structure of the pre-thinking question. This is fact in the argument 1. Conclusion breakdown criteria is 2. So let's translate each one of these. Under what circumstances would the reward system not be responsible? So this is your conclusion breakdown criteria. You can see when you say the reward system is not responsible for the difference in performance, you're breaking the conclusion down. Given the fact that full-time lecturers do a much better job than professors do, and the reward system for professors places greater emphasis on learning than on teaching. So this is the facts and the argument. You can't go against the facts. So this is mapped to this. Can you really see the mapping here? Can you really see how this maps to this and how this maps to this? Just two things. Spend some time. This is 1, and this is 1. This is 2, and this is 2 here. Guys, I want to see some yeses or nos. Can you see how 1 and 1 map to each other, 2 and 2 map to each other? When we see conclusion breakdown, when you say reward system is not responsible, facts in the argument over there. Okay. So with that, let's kind of figure out under what conditions or circumstances will the reward system not cause the difference between the two groups that we are comparing, given that we know the reward system for one group. Let's see certain circumstances. If the other group had an identical reward system, then we can't blame the reward system. Everyone agrees with this? The other group has an identical reward system, you can't blame the reward system. If most tenured faculty does not act as per the reward system, if there's a survey done which says the majority of tenured faculty, they have this reward system which places greater emphasis on research than on teaching, but most of them don't act as per the reward system, then in that case, also you can't blame the reward system. Absolutely correct? Both of these are scenarios in which the conclusion breaks down. If that is the case, the assumptions are the non-tenured faculty doesn't have an identical reward system. Most tenured faculty cares about the reward system. Okay. Everyone's good here? You can really see how we went through a process. This wasn't rocket science. As long as we understood the argument, as long as we connected the dots, as long as we asked the falsification question, we were able to figure out scenarios in which the conclusion breaks down. As we figured those out, we were able to come up with the assumptions here. We were able to do that pre-thinking. Okay. Now, again, what is happening in this argument? We're comparing two entities. One entity has a certain incentive system. The other entity, we don't know anything about this, and the author is blaming that incentive system there. Here is another argument that's very, very similar to this. At the face of it, you'd see that this is fairly different. But if you look at the underlying logic of it, if you kind of distill that, you're going to find it's very, very similar. The argument says a recent survey indicates that independent coffee roasters create more diverse flavor profiles than roasters for working for large coffee chains. This difference between these two entities, again, you're comparing two entities, can be explained by evaluation metrics used for the latter group. Again, former latter group. You can see the parallel here. The performance assessments for in-house roasters at major chains generally emphasize consistency with established flavors, flavor standards rather than experimentation with unique taste combinations. Again, on the face of it, very different context. On the face of it, very different wording, but the argument uses exactly the same logic. It uses your ability to distill that logic and then tell me what the answer is. And the correct answers would be very, very similar to the correct answers of the prior argument. Okay. If you see through this, can you see that over here? And that's the value of visualizing information, because uh, there are a ton of arguments in which you're comparing entities, and if you're able to distill the argument down, you'd be able to understand the logic that you have to use for the correct answer. And if you understand that logic, then if you see an answer choice which builds upon that logic, you'd be able to identify that as the correct answer. Okay, and that's the value of purely distilling the argument or simplifying the argument there, and that's one of the most fundamental skills that you need. Okay. But again, that's the value of pre-thinking here. Pre-thinking is just, as I said, question stem, but the skills that you need, it's a litmus test. You won't do pre-thinking well if you don't build those skills, and which is why pre-thinking by itself is not an end all, but it's an enabler for you to be a better reader of information and better linker of information, which is what you need. Now, a lot of people are concerned about timing with regards to pre-thinking. How many of you are concerned about this? And how many of you are really saying, man, this is good, but this takes very, very long. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. Really good responses, by the way, the person who did that. And you can really see that person using this brain in real time. And as you do that, you're building those connections. Okay, coming back to timing. How many of you are concerned with timing? If you're concerned, say yes. If you're not concerned, say no. Both are really good responses. I'd like to know that. Okay. A lot of people are concerned with timing. Let me actually start with some start here. And this is really critical. Okay. If you go look at GMAT Club, go look at YouTube, those are two places where you'd see validated testimonials. Why? Because you can't get a testimonial on GMAT Club unless and until you provide a live report, live link to your score report, or your MBA.com login details. Okay, there's no way you can post a review. Every review posted on GMAT Club is validated by one of the GMAT Club members. They log into MBA.com, and when you go there, of all the other partners who posted reviews since the year 2020, e-GMATers have reported 60% of 700 plus or 645 plus scores. So 700 plus on the old GMAT, 645 plus on the current GMAT over here. And the other 40% include these people here. And this is when these people were partners. So right now, Empower GMAT is no longer a partner. Crackweb is no longer a partner, but earlier these guys were partners here. And if you include all of these over there, if you look at if you look at our YouTube channel, you will see way more success. So our YouTube channel, I think right now is about 440, 450 student debriefs. This is more than those on the YouTube channel of any other prep company out there. Okay. In fact, pretty much every other prep company combined as well. If you look at 5-star reviews, this data is about 2 months old, but the numbers are still very, very similar in this case here. So one thing that's there is these results would not exist if these methods didn't work. Okay. At the same time, what I will also tell you is when you start learning anything new, whether it's pre-thinking or reading strategy and reading comprehension that you're going to learn next week, you will take longer. Why do we take longer? Because when you're learning something new, and if you're truly learning something new, your brain's building new connections. And when we build new connections, learn new processes, our neurons fire relatively slowly. Why? Because they have to figure out the direction in which they need to fire. And then they have to repeat and repeat and repeat in that direction. So, but once you do that, and once you figure out how those neurons need to fire, once you build that repeatable process, those neurons fire extremely fast. A classic example, which I can tell, which each one of you probably has experienced, is typing. When you first typed, most people were able to type fewer than 5 or 6 words per minute. That's kind of when you didn't know where the letters were on the keyboard, when your fingers did not have the right muscles, which is kind of very similar to neurons firing. Why? Because your neurons tell the fingers where to move when you see a certain letter on the keyboard. But with practice and people who truly learn how to type properly, people can no long can get to about 31-32 minutes a word. Not only that, when you didn't know typing, you could only type for 10 minutes before you got tired. Now people can do 30-31 minutes, and type for about 25 to 30 minutes before they have to take a break. So essentially you can produce about 8 to 10 times as much output right now before you need to take a break. The same process is going to happen with pre-thinking. If you're someone whose accuracy is at this level, where your accuracy is uh, at that low end, your time to answer questions is medium. The first thing you're going to really experience with regards to pre-thinking is a movement in this direction. One is that your accuracy is going to go up. So you're, on the y-axis, you're going up, but your time to answer questions is going to go higher as well. You're going to go towards the right-hand side. Why is this going to happen? Because, as I said, your brain's firing those new connections there. And at that point, many of you would be like this guy here saying, hey, why the hell am I doing pre-thinking? I'm already concerned about timing. How many of you feel that or have felt that? How many of you felt that? At that time, I want you to trust the process. There are people who give up on the process, and really just start doing a shortcut on the process of pre-thinking. These people do not improve. Okay, but people who trust this get to point number 3, and this is where you can see that the movement is very different. Your accuracy is still going up. On the y side, we're still moving in this direction, but on the x side, we are moving here. Your time to answer questions reduces significantly. You're actually better than what you started with. And once you do that, you kind of reach what I call as pre-thinking hysteresis, which is where once you achieve that state, you are going to continue to improve because you've already seen the benefits. You're better than what you started with, and once you do that, your accuracy will continue to improve. Your time to answer questions will continue to go down, and this is the median time to answer questions. Remember this. Even when you achieve point number 4, point number 4 is where you're in that 85th to 99th percentile zone. There will still be questions which will take you 3 minutes, but the median time is going to go to about a minute 30, a minute 35. There would still be questions where you'd struggle with pre-thinking. Okay, because that's kind of where those questions are stumping you. Remember, it's an adaptive test. It's going to continue to throw more and more difficult visualizations at you. That's the job of the test. And if once you achieve point number 3, every question that you falter on is an opportunity to improve. I make mistakes on a few questions even now. When I make mistakes, I'm actually the most excited. Why? Because that's where I'm learning. That's where neural connections are being made in my brain. If you're not making mistakes, yes, I know you don't want to make mistakes, but again, eventually you want to be ironclad for the test. So questions that you make mistakes on, slow down, spend way more time on them, figure out which neural connections did you not make, build those neural connections, and then you're going to improve a lot faster. Okay. Don't do the course as a checklist. Don't do learning as a checklist. Make learning a process. Focus on learning. If you focus on learning, the score is going to be there automatically. If you focus on getting the score, you're going to find you hit a plateau fairly soon. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay. This is what I want you to take away from this webinar. Here's the guy who actually got a 770 but struggled with CR early on. He got a 727 percentile on CR. But then the moment he adopted pre-thinking, in 15 days, his CR ability went from that 25, 30th percentile to 97th percentile. And you can really see the code. He says, pre-thinking is the reason you need to do pre-thinking is to help you focus on the logic and not deviate from key argument when trap or out of scope answer choices show up. Again, focusing on what the argument's about. The guy who scored 715, it says, hey, pre-thinking helps you reject incorrect answer choices with a high degree of confidence. Here's a guy who scored 735, improved from a 14th to a 91st percentile on verbal. Overall verbal, really bad reader. In fact, if you look at and watch his interview, he doesn't speak fluently either, but got a 735, got a 91st percentile on verbal. When he started off, timing was a huge issue for him. So just taking 3 to 4 minutes just to understand the question. Forget about answering the question. Okay. Here's a guy who improved tremendously on his verbal, got a 90th percentile on GMAT verbal. Again, all of these are non-natives here. And pre-thinking applies not just to CR but also to RC. And again, you can see the same sentiment repeat that hey, pre-thinking allows you to focus on the relevant ideas there. Okay. Got to go through this journey, especially if you're starting at an extremely low ability level. The distance between 1 and 3 depends on your starting ability and your diligence. If you're extremely diligent, if your starting abilities are at 35th percentile, you can go from 1 to 3 in about 25 arguments. If you're not diligent, or if your starting abilities are at a 15th percentile, you might need 50 arguments, but you will get there. If Divi could get there, if Samarth could get there, so can you. If Jim could get there, so can you. Okay. With that, let's kind of focus on understanding our ability or on building our ability to understand the conclusion. This is an excellent question. I want you to solve this question. I'm going to reopen poll, and the way we want to do this is I want you to select not answered first, so that I don't time you as a group. You yourself time as a group. So if a bunch of you, 120 of you to select not answered, which is option beyond option E. That way, when you choose an option other than not answered, I'm going to call time over here. About 7 of you have said not answered. I want 20 people to say not answered before I show the question to you guys. 10, 13, 19, 20. Good. Don't choose any answer choice because you haven't seen the argument yet. You may bias people on the towards the wrong answer choice. Okay. Here is the question. I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to pause my video. Good luck, guys. 70% of the class is done. Get those answers in. But 80% of the class, actually 90% of the class is done now. Five, four, three, two, and one. I'm going to end the poll and broadcast the results. And as you see this, see the results, what you're going to really find is that you have two answer choices that are popular: choice B and choice C. And choices C and D have a few people as well. And this is an extremely, extremely simple argument. But the max accuracy that you can get here on this question is about 47, 48%. So which makes this question a hard question, a 705 level question. Okay. So let's kind of understand why is this confusing for some people, what aspect of it, because to read this argument, it's fairly simple over here. So what are we trying to do? We need to finance road repairs, and the commission is considering increasing considering a 50% increase on the toll, and the current toll is 10 cents per mile um, for vehicles. Okay. The commissioner makes the claim, is saying, hey, as we increase this toll, we're going to increase the annual revenue by 50%. So you increase the toll by 50%, you increase the annual revenue by 50%. So the conclusion is that my annual revenue is going to go up by about 50%. In other words, what I'm really saying is, if last year my annual revenue was $1 million, then this year my annual revenue will be at least $1.6, 1.51, 1.52, or 1.7, 1.8, anything that's more than 50% is what that annual revenue will be. Okay. Is that clear? Is the visualization of conclusion clear? Fairly simple, right? Is that clear? Yes, no? Perfect. Now, how do we estimate annual revenue? You have the argument up there. Can you tell me how will we estimate annual revenue? How do we estimate annual revenue? Distance traveled in terms of total price. Yes. Yes. Very, very good. The annual revenue is toll per mile multiplied by the total number of toll miles. Okay. Was everyone able to get this? Are there any doubts on this? Okay. We are given this here. We are charging on a per mile basis in this case. Okay. This question, the reason why I've chosen this question in the webinar, is an excellent reinforcement of what must be true in an assumption is. Okay. So we're going to ask a falsification question. Under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, will my conclusion break down? What we really know is the toll per mile is already plus 50%. Okay. And we want the annual revenue to be plus 50% at least. Or I would call this plus 50% because it has to be greater than 50%. Okay. In what circumstances, given this relationship, would the annual revenue not increase by at least 50%? Okay, not increase by at least 50%, given that we know that toll per mile has already been increased by 50%. So what's our pre-thinking? In what scenario will this not go up by 50%? If the total number of toll miles, you have a relationship product of two variables, one's already gone up by 50%. If the total number of toll miles goes down, then in that case, because my conclusion is going to break down, which means my assumption is the total number of toll miles does not decrease. Everybody is clear with this? Okay. Now, I'm going to bring back how you guys polled. All right. Choice E, sorry, E for elephant is the correct answer. 42% or 18 of you got that right. Okay. I'm going to repeat this once again. In what scenario can I break my conclusion down? If this entity, where did my annotation go? Okay. We know our goal really is to increase, let me just go this, we increase this entity up by plus 50%. We know this entity is a product of two numbers, A and B, and we know one of these is already up by 50%. Why? Because we're going to do that. The only way this entity over here will not go up by 50% is if in total number of toll miles goes down. That's basically it. Okay. So that's my breakdown condition. So my assumption is I don't want my conclusion breaking down. So my assumption is that the total number of miles driven does not decrease. That's it. With that understanding, let me evaluate every answer choice. Choice B, a lot of you chose choice B, said the total number of trips made on the highway will not decrease from its current level. What's the definition of an assumption? Can you guys repeat that definition? What's the definition of an assumption? An assumption is an unstated idea that. Assumption is what? Can you type it out? If that must be true for the conclusion to break down. Okay. Now, if the total number of trips, if that total number of trips that goes down, does it mean that does that necessarily mean that the total number of miles driven on that highway will go down? What could compensate for fewer trips? If last year we had 1,000 trips, okay, now this year we have 990 trips, 950 trips. What could compensate? Longer trips, right? More distance per trip. The average trip duration could go up, or average trip length could go up. Okay, so is choice B a must be true? Does it satisfy the must be true criteria? Do we require it to be true? Absolutely not. Right? It's a great strengthener. It's a premise, but it's not a necessary premise. Everyone who chose choice B, do you understand why choice B is wrong? Is that clear to you? People who chose choice B, there are 18 of you who did that. Actually, there are 11 of you who did that. I'm sorry. Is that clear? Why choice B is wrong? And you know, do you have a framework of thinking about must be true so that you don't repeat that mistake? Choice E is our correct answer. Talks about the total distance. We've already talked about it. Not going to go in there. Choice C, average length of trip. What could compensate for average length of trip? If the average length goes down from, let's say, 12 miles to 11 miles or 10 miles, what could compensate for average length of trip? More trips. Yes, the opposite, the complement of choice B would compensate for it. Okay. People who chose choice B, is that clear for you? Perfect. Again, think about that must be true aspect. Same thing with choice D as well. Now, when you now look at this and really say, hey, people who made a mistake, whether you chose either choices B or C, should you pat yourself on the back by saying, hey, I chose an answer choice that is incorrect, but it's also a popular incorrect answer choice? Or should you really ask yourself, why did I not apply the must be true aspect of assumption in this argument? What should you be doing if you truly want to improve? The second part, right? And this is where I want to make sure you understand this piece here. Every answer choice other than the correct answer choice is absolutely incorrect. In other words, it would not be the correct answer even if you remove the current correct answer. You'd have to get another correct answer. It's not incorrect because of the presence of the current correct answer. There are no better and worse answer choices. They're wrong and right. The wrong answer choices are by themselves wrong. The correct answer choice is by itself correct. It will be replaced by another correct answer choice. If we were to do that, you would not bring in one of the wrong answer choices to replace it. Is that clear to everybody? Will this now change your attitude when you make a mistake? Okay. Now, bonus question for you. How would you change this argument if you truly wanted to make choice be correct? How would you change this argument if you truly wanted to make choice be correct? Excellent. The person who said 10 cent per trip, your brain's truly going well. Remove the per mile basis. Okay. As simple as that. Again, that's why reading, comprehending, visualizing the argument is really, really important. In this argument, choice B would be the correct one. And this is the value of you actually understanding the argument completely. I gave this argument to ChatGPT and said, change this argument such that choice B is correct. Couldn't do it. And that's GPT 4.0. But you guys were, those of you who understood this argument inside out. Bottom line is develop that level of understanding. That's when you improve, not by solving thousands and thousands of questions. Okay. With that, we're going to solve a couple of questions here. And we're going to go through the entire the same process here. We're going to go through still solving. But before that, are we learning things? Are we feeling good? Okay. Do you feel you're getting better at pre-thinking? You feel you have a clear idea of how you will improve your ability in critical reasoning? Perfect. Yes, good things take time, and thank God they do, because if they didn't take time, then everyone would be able to improve, not just folks who are putting in the effort, right? So we're going to do one other question. This one's called Shelby will refuse. I again want you to select not answered. I want 20 people to say not answered. Really good. Here is the argument. I'm going to pause my video, mute myself. But 80% of the group is done, guys. Get those answers in. Five, four, three, two, and one. I'm going to end the poll. I'm going to broadcast the results. So clearly, let me just resume this. Clearly, what I can really see is there is, a lot of confusion. The most popular choice only has 33% of the votes. Choice D is just as popular as choice C. And then we have choices B and E, which also have a ton of votes. So clearly, there are things that confused you. Now, the reason why I have every question in this session there's a reason for that. The reason why I have this question here is because um, the language here, the focus on understanding and visualizing information is just so I mean, the language is so beautiful that if you read that properly, you're going to be able to answer this question like this. If you misreading that, you're going to actually be confused with multiple answer choices here, because this question then starts to introduce a ton of constraints in this particular argument. So let's kind of see why reading properly is absolutely critical in this case. Okay. So what's going on here? Last year, we collected a lot of garbage. We did not actually refuse as garbage. We did not broadcast. Sorry, we did not recycle, not broadcast. We did not recycle any amount of garbage. So if I were to really consider one trash can as one truck worth of garbage, so how many trucks did we send for burning or incineration last year? Can you count the number of trash cans here? And just put that number in this case, in this case. How many trash cans do you see here? 10. Good. Okay. Now, this year, we're going to do recycling. Okay. And we are going to send uh, some trash cans here. So typically, if you were to collect the same amount of garbage, you'd expect half that number, so about 5 trash cans. Now, my question to you is, if this year we collect 10 times as much garbage, so 10x as much garbage, if you were to read the argument, I want you to tell me how many trucks do you think we will send for incineration this year? How many trucks do you think we'll send for incineration if we were to collect 10 times as much garbage? Okay. Read the argument very carefully. So if you were to collect 100 trucks worth of refuse or garbage, which are one and the same thing in the context of this argument, how many trucks do you think we would send for incineration? I want about 30 responses. I have right now have about what, 16, 17 responses here? 20, 23, 26. How many trucks will I send for incineration this year? Come on, can I get a few more responses? I'm collected 100 trucks worth of refuse. Could. I'm going to end the poll, broadcast the results. You can really see 50% of you chose 50. That's not the correct answer. The correct answer is still just 5 trucks. Choice A is the correct answer. And let's see why we are saying here. Let's read this. This year, city services will separate for recycling enough refuse two is a purpose word, to reduce the number of truckloads to be incinerated to half of last year's number, which means last year, if we sent 10 last year, then we will send 5 regardless the amount of refuse collected. Is that clear? Purely, I'm just doing reading and translating. That's all there is, translating into numbers. Is that clear? Even if I collect 100 trucks worth of refuse, I'm only going to send half as many as I sent last year. Everybody, I want to see more yeses here. Okay. And that's the value of building those visualization skills, reading and visualizing. That's what's key to answering this question here. Okay. What's the conclusion? The ash generated this year will be half of what it was last year. We're going to ask ourselves, how can I break that conclusion? How can the ash generated be greater than 50%? Okay, how can this be greater than 50%? That's my falsification scenario. Given that I'm only going to send half as many trucks. If I'm only going to send half as many trucks, in what scenario can I generate more ash than half of what it was last year? If I'm only going to send half as many trucks, the only scenario I'm going to generate more ash is if I pack those trucks so tightly that each truck generates more ash. Everyone's clear on this? Okay. So my assumption is that the truckload, ash per truckload, is going to be similar to or lower than what it was last year. The person who says can't understand, what aspect can you not understand? Can you be a bit more elaborate here? I'd be happy to address your doubt. Again, last year we sent 10 trucks. This year we're going to send 5 trucks. The only scenario in which 5 trucks could generate more than 50% ash per truckload is if we pack those trucks so tightly that the average ash per truckload goes up. Okay, there's no other scenario in which we can generate more ash. Okay. Let's go through the answer choice analysis. Let me look at this is how you guys polled here. Okay, let's kind of go through each answer choice. Choice A is that kind of example where it's a must be true, but it doesn't provide any new information. Hence, it's wrong. Choice B is about cost. Not very many of you chose cost. Choice C talks about the proportion of recyclable materials. Doesn't matter. And this is kind of where recycling is a ruse here, where it's not the core piece. The core piece is incineration of refuse, and the proportion of recyclable material is not relevant. People who chose this were thinking if the proportion is less, I'm going to send more truckloads for incineration. They did not understand half as many truckloads. Okay. People who chose choice C, you fell for that ruse. You basically said, hey, if there isn't as much recyclable material, then I'm going to send more truckloads. Is that what was happening in your brain? Is that what was happening? People who chose choice C, again, the corrective action, read the argument, understand it properly. And this is kind of where people say, I can't pre-think, and pre-thinking isn't working for me. And whereas the correct reason why things don't work for you is because you've read the information incorrectly. So even if you weren't using pre-thinking, you would have still made that mistake. So learn to understand, diagnose why you made a mistake, map it to the correct cause. Once you map it to the correct cause, then the corrective action is read and visualize information, especially when the sentence structure is more dense. Read and visualize it more properly. Choice D, which is a correct option, talks about ash per truckload. We've already talked about this, so that's there. That is our correct option. But 30% of you got this right. D for delta is correct. Choice E talks about the total quantity of refuse. Again, irrelevant. Why? Because we're only going to send half as many truckloads. All right. How are you guys feeling so far? We started with a bunch of goals in this session. Do you feel we are kind of making good progress towards those goals? Can you really see it's not about tricks, it's about building core skills? And the more you build core skills, the easier it becomes for you to answer questions here. Okay. So with that, what I want to really also do is I want to tell you how will you build core skills. That's really important. What role aspects of your e-GMAT course uh, plays aspects play in helping you build core skills. Okay. So let's go over here, and you should be able to see my screen in this case. Okay. So the first thing which is really important is reading and understanding information here. And this is absolutely critical. This is where we kind of teach you the basics of how to read a sentence, how are long sentences formed, how should you deconstruct long sentences to visualize them, where should you pause, and there's some grammar here because deconstructing long sentences requires some grammar. So go through this, but this is just about 15-20 minutes of grammar. Then we have this really essential module of how do you understand meaning. This is where you're putting things to numbers. You're kind of looking at sentences with multiple modifiers and really saying which entity is modifying which subject. So that's really critical over here. You have a bunch of assessments here, and then we have a final evaluation. So this is, it reinforces and teaches good reading habits. Even if you're a voracious reader, you're going to find that this is a challenging module for you. Then comes the core critical reasoning course, and this is where how should you read arguments when you faltered in identifying the conclusion in the second question. The ABC test that you have in premise and conclusion two is something that's going to help you. And you can really see these are extremely detailed. What you see over here, these 100%, 85%, these are not completion stats. These are your scores, evaluation stats over here. And we built technology, and this is something that we built for, we built 8 years ago, where every learning activity is evaluated. Every learning activity gives you feedback that's personalized to you, so that you know when you need to revise this. Then we teach you, in-depth reading, and this is absolutely critical. So understanding what does some, most, the mean, what's the impact of only, all, because these are really important keywords in statements as well as in arguments here. We teach you how do you visualize information, how do you draw inferences from multiple statements, and then each one of these has evaluations in. Then we have integrated evaluations in practice quizzes 1 and 2, and then we increase the difficulty, again have more integrated evaluations here. We carry this on with assumptions. So when you go through the inference module, you'd know how to read statements, you'd know how to visualize statements, you'd know how to link statements, and you'd know how arguments are built. Then in assumption, you go through each argument type. So remember, we talked about comparing entities, that's two entities. When we compared about logical gap, that's over here. When we're comparing segments, that's here. When you're doing comparing entities and segments within entities, that's in this case. Then you have quant-based arguments here. Then we have a bunch of application files. Again, there is a ton of application here, but then this is more challenging piece. The same, think of this as 605, 655 levels, and think of these as 705 or higher, and then you have feedback here. Each one of these entities is evaluated. These are your evaluation scores. Then we have, for those of you who upgraded your subscription to Coach Connect, we have advanced visualization sessions where you work with an expert. Again, you have homework quizzes there which are designed just for that advanced visualization. Again, 705, 755, 805 level problems here, so that you kind of reach that next level. Repeat the process and evaluate, repeat the process and strengthen, weaken, repeat and boldface here. And then we have another Coach Connect session with all of these in this case. Then you go through medium cementing, then you go through hard cementing in this case as well. And this is where once you go through these, you go from that 50 or 20th percentile to 55th percentile to 80th, 85th percentile in this case, over here, at least if you hit your metrics. We also have AI running in the back end here, where you get all of this data, but you want to understand how you're doing compared to the competition. So every learning activity has a grade. So we translate your score, and we only look at your first attempt score into a comparative grade here. And you can really see if your score is lower than median, you get a lower grade. If your score is equal to median, you get a certain grade. your scores higher than median over here. In this case, Prethinking Concept 5, you got 100. This person got 100%. The median was 67%. Got a grade A over here. And this is something which is really critical, because if you get a grade B or a grade C, it gives you an idea as to you've got to go back, revise your mistakes before moving forward. This student did not do that, hence his improvement wasn't as fast. But if you do this, you're going to see that despite getting grade C's, you get way more grade A's. And then we use AI to compute your learning level grade here. This learning level grade is a really good predictor of your ability in this case. Bottom line is, this entire process keeps you in control. That's absolutely critical. As long as you inculcate good study habits, you're going to find that learning is fun, learning is extremely predictable, improvement happens in stages, but it does happen. Okay. But again, you need to be diligent, you need to stay focused on learning here. Okay. Does that help? Okay. But and that's really, really critical. Now, for those of you who are not connected with me on LinkedIn, again, connect with me. Or if you want, you can write to me. Also have rajat@e-GMAT.com. Those of you who are not e-GMATers, who are not paid students, we have a comprehensive free trial. Try it out, and let me know if you need help making a decision. Again, it's really important to understand whether this learning method would work for you. Here is my LinkedIn contact. Here, if you want to take a free mock, that's something that's there as well. Okay. At this point, I'd be happy to take on any questions. If you are an e-GMATer, you already have access to PSP. If you're not an e-GMATer, you can get your study plan here. I think we have a few slots open this weekend. I'm not sure how many, just to be very clear. So forgive me if you don't see any. Also, I'm sharing the session handout that you guys can download so that you have this. I'll be sharing the recording of this session in about 8 hours or so. Okay. Questions on this session, feedback, learnings from this session, I'd be happy to really address any question. But I'd love to really see some learnings. I'd love to get some feedback on the session itself. Alex, I'm going to share the recording with you. So even if you miss 45 minutes, you're going to really see that. A couple of other questions here, which is a link to the YouTube channel. Let me do that. So here's the link to the YouTube channel that's in the Q&A pod. In the falsification process, yes, you only need to falsify the conclusion. Absolutely. Guys, learnings, please, in the short answer pod on the right below my video. You can put the learning. That'd be extremely, extremely, extremely happy. Here is the link to the YouTube channel. That is there. But your learning from the session, your feedback on the session, I truly, truly value that. I'm going to just move my video more front and center so there's a bit more real estate to that. Okay. With that, I'd like to thank you guys, and I want to thank you for joining. You guys participated really well. I really absolutely love the percentage of this class that responded to poll questions, posted their doubts. Thank you for that, and I look forward to seeing you on e-GMAT.com. Thank you and happy learning.